So I guess for the last two casual connects, I spoke about what the big casinos are looking for in social gaming. And I guess for fear of repeating myself for a third time, the conference organizers asked me to focus on US regulation, which is unfortunately something that a few people over the past few days have touched upon. I'm going to go firsthand, basically, what I've been going through in the US with some casinos and lotteries. So I've worked for about 6 different casinos, and I've been working with the Delaware Lottery this year to help them regulate Delaware and launch and go through their whole process with an RFP and vendor selection, helping them fine-tune what the regulations should look like. And I've also been advising Tropicana in Atlantic City and working with them on vendor selection and helping them push the things that they need to push in order to see a viable market in New Jersey. And I guess one of the reasons why it's sort of important or relevant to this conference is because of the large percentage of people that are coming from the US in social gambling, and what will the impact be to the social gaming community, and is there really something to fear? I mean, we saw Derek saying there's nothing to fear, there's nothing to fear. But the regulation is going to happen, and the question is when. So I'm going to go through a little bit about kind of what we've seen, the complexities of the markets, and where I think the future for regulation in the US is going. So just a snapshot of where we are today. As we heard from a couple of people, 3 states regulated, Nevada, Delaware, New Jersey, all in the past 12 months. And it is going on a state-by-state basis as opposed to federal, and the change is taking place very slowly. There's also an issue, for the longest time there was a big fight between whether it was going to be state by state or whether it was going to be federal. The federal Congress has been pushing for an internet-only poker solution so that players can play with each other across all of the states. And I'll go into that a little bit later about why many believe that that's not legal, although that doesn't seem to preclude them from wanting to push it forward anyway. And then recently, and much more recently, they've made a huge public statement, they've gotten a lot of press, is Sheldon Adelson. He is the CEO of the largest casino group in the world. Mainly, his money's coming out of Macau right now. And he is dead against all online gambling, federal or state, and has been using his vast amount of money to go convince lobby a lot of the congressmen and attorney generals to ban this. And the impact of that is, people are very worried about that right now, which would be great news for you guys, because then it would mean that no online gambling would happen and social would be the only way forward for everyone in the US. And then I want to go into touch a little bit about sports betting and why I think that's relevant in this conversation. So just to give you an understanding of how big the market is right now, this comes from H2 Capital. So the yellow or the orange, whatever you want to call that color, is horse racing. That's the only thing that's legal in the United States. And the state lotteries, the online component of state lottery, which is very, very slow to go as well. As we saw this year, well, in 2013, we saw Nevada launch at the end of the year, and then we saw Delaware launch, and also New Jersey launch. And we, the big pop everyone is expecting in 2015 with California. This slide is a little bit out of date because you have to push some of the states back. But basically what this is saying is that there's nothing going on right now, but once one goes, it's going to be like a domino effect. And what we're seeing right now is that with New Jersey launching, everyone says, oh, Pennsylvania's got to be next, because they're going to be feeling the pressure from Delaware and from New Jersey. So it's this kind of regional pressure issue that's going on. And the big question on the West Coast is going to be California and what it does to the whole West Coast, the west side of the United States. So as you can see, according to H2, it'll be quite fragmented starting in 2016 with a vast number of states launching between now and 2016. And so just how big it is in the top states, they're estimating that in 2017, that New York is going to be as big, slightly bigger than California. And obviously New York is the 4th largest state now in the US in terms of population, just behind Florida as of last month. But the reason why is because California is only going to be pushing poker only, and that is not as lucrative as casino. Otherwise, California would be much bigger. But as you can see, there's a precipitous drop between the first, I'd say, 7 or 8, and then how fast it drops off, even at like between North Carolina and Maryland. If you want to put, I'll give you a copy of the slides. You don't have to take the photos. So it's similar to Europe in that it's state by state. Here it's going country by country. There's always this issue of the federal overhang, similar here with the EU. There's this tension that coexists between the lottery and commercial and private casinos. And there's also a wide variety of range between what is a fair and what's excessive tax. So take a country like Denmark that legalized here, 20% net gaming revenue. It's kind of fair, it's a very healthy environment. Then take the opposite and you take France, which is going off of a wager or stake tax, a wager tax rate. And that's effectively, by the way, just by the way poker's played, it's put poker tax at effectively 80%. So we're seeing the same thing in the States, where a state like Nevada is at 6.5 or 6.25, and a state like Delaware is north of 40, 45%, depending on the type of game. So it does impact the success. So you take a country like France, and you now see probably a 70% black market, because players don't want to play on a site that they can feel the high tax rate, because the promotions aren't as generous. You just feel it as a player. So it's impacting the success state by state. But the big thing is not what's similar to between the US and Europe, but what's different. And they are very different operating environments. Here in Europe, it's a much more healthy coexistence between the player, the operator, and the regulator. In the US, the regulators are much more difficult. We heard earlier about how expensive it is, how difficult it is. You know, in each one of the suppliers in the US has to get licensed. Even the affiliates in regulated online gaming in the US has to get regulated, which is something that I don't think anyone would even consider contemplating here in Europe. I think right now, even in Holland right now, they're fighting to get the suppliers to get regulated, where in the US that's just standard right off the bat. And in Italy and in Spain and in France and Denmark, none of the suppliers have had to have gotten regulated. Now, from my perspective as someone who operates online casinos, I want my supplier to be regulated, because it puts the onus back on the supplier to abide by all the laws. One of the big differences, and this is something for anyone who's creating a social game, who's looking to then put it in real money and then think that they can take this to the United States, IP enforcement is a vast difference between what goes on in real money in Europe and the US, and also in social around the world and the US. In the United States, IP enforcement of slots is like a sport. You have BLAU, WMS, IGT, they're suing each other for tens of millions of dollars over cascading reels, or how would that bonus multiplier work, or basic game functionality. In the US, it is a huge, huge issue in that these big suppliers are spending a massive amount of money to protect and defend these patents, because they are worth a tremendous amount of money. I think 2 years ago, BLAU sued IGT for a bonusing tool that wasn't even a front-end game feature. It's just, how do you use your bonusing tool? And I think they got $70 million for that patent. So, you know, when you guys are developing games, for those of you who are game developers, just be careful, or at least be knowledgeable, or acknowledge the fact that if you do have a desire to take your games into the US in real money, how you design your games, I would speak to an IP lawyer to confer with them, because you might not realize that you're doing it. And it's an issue right now for online gaming operators, who, I love the net entertainment games, but they violate a lot of the US patents. So now they're going to have to figure out how they're either going to cut a deal with IGT or BLAU or WMS, or they're going to have to just take those that don't violate IP into the US. And that's why if you look at a casino in New Jersey right now, you don't see much content that isn't already on the floor. Another issue is geolocation. So when you have online gaming in Europe, so you've got Italy and France and the UK and Denmark, they each have their own laws, their own regulations. So if you're in Italy, you can't play unless you're playing on a .it. Now, because there's no federal EU-wide legislation that's banning real money gaming, if you were to go and be in another country and you're right over the border, not a big deal. I mean, it's not ideal, you know, but Italy, the geolocation is an issue. They want you to be in Italy when you're playing that game. You can spoof it if you want to really try hard, and it's not that big of a deal, so long as it's not done on a mass basis. In the United States, that is the worst thing that could happen, because there is a federal ban that was passed in 2006. So what it said was each state is allowed to offer intra-state gambling within its own jurisdiction. However, the minute you go across lines of a state, and I'm in Pennsylvania on the border playing on a New Jersey site, that violates the Wire Act, and I'm now gambling across state lines, and that is a federal violation. So the operator now has violated has made a federal violation. So the way that the geolocation is being instituted in the U.S. is a lot trickier than in Europe. So one of the reasons why, and you'll hear me say later, people are deeming New Jersey not to be successful, or any state right now not to be successful, is because geolocation has been the biggest issue so far. Payments is not great either, but geolocation by far is the biggest issue. And as I was saying to the payments, there still is over 50% rejection rate in the US. Visa and MasterCard, some of the card schemes are not working well with the gaming industry. Visa worse than MasterCard, but it's the banks. It's the issuing banks, so your credit card bank issuer. Those guys are not accepting to adopt into this. So you're ending up with a 15% acceptance rate on Visa, 50% on MasterCard, and so you're left with what they're calling ACH transfer. And it's great if you're European, because we're all used to transferring amongst our friends, wiring money to each other. In the US, they still use checks. So I say to people, just wire me the money, and they're like, but you're gonna steal money from my bank account. I mean, people in the US really don't understand ACH, and so that's a problem, because people are thinking, I'm giving up my bank accounts and you can go and steal cash from me. So it's a bit of an education process, both for the individual that ACH is not bad, but also for the fact that the banks themselves need an education process that this is legal. They just don't want to take on the risk right now. So if you can't get the money on, then you can't, what's the point of operating? Just some of the things and the market dynamics that are going on right now. It is very early days. We are within 12 months of launch. New Jersey, we're only within 3 months. In fact, the numbers for New Jersey are coming out for the second month in 5 hours, which is, if you're dealing in New Jersey, that's like a big deal. But right now, for the longest time, we had heard poker, poker, poker. The federal government was trying to push poker. Nevada's only poker. And then Delaware launched casino. New Jersey launched casino. Now people are realizing the focus is on casino. The money is in casino. State-by-state poker is going to be very difficult to make money. Incumbent brands are surpassing foreign or unknown brands. So companies like Party Poker and 888 and GameSys, three of the biggest operators in Europe, have all said, we want to launch our own websites in New Jersey, for example, and said, okay, if you're Borgata, Party said, I will help you, but I want my own website with my own brand, and I will drive my own marketing. And those brands are not working as well as people had anticipated. A lot of the brands like 888 and Party have a following, but they left in 2006, so they thought, well, we can just come right in and people will remember who we are, and they're not remembering who they are as well as they thought that they would. So what it will mean, because they are amazing marketers, is that it's just going to take them longer and probably more money to catch up to the incumbent brands in the US. There's been a poor player funnel due to the geolocation, and as I said before, there's little content diversification because of the strict IP enforcement from the incumbents. So where are we now in terms of regulation? The green states, there's 3 states, as we've heard from a number of people. The yellow ones are kind of a work in progress, which is California, and I'll go into some of them a little bit more later. Iowa, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and then the red ones are kind of some form of discussion or legislation had been passed and didn't work, and the black ones are prohibited. It's really interesting that Derek put up a slide before and had Texas as up there as a potential, where I'm hearing that because there's no land-based casino, I've never heard Texas on the map, so it's really interesting. So everyone sort of has their own version of what's next. There's a lot of speculation. From the lottery side, there's a little bit more traction. And why it's significant is that it's not just the lottery games, it's the lottery scratch cards that people care about, because they're essentially a slot. So more and more states are starting to get momentum with selling lottery tickets online. It's slower than I think it should be, but it's getting there. You have to realize that all of this became a reality in December of 2000 and I think 11. It was either 10 or 11 when the Department of Justice said this ban on federal ban on online gambling is just sports betting, and that lotteries and the commercial casinos have the right to issue, well, they officially said lotteries have the right to do ticket sales online. Everyone interpreted that to say, oh, that must mean casino and poker and bingo. So no one has said anything yet. No clarification has been made. That's why there's a lot of controversy about, can a guy like Sheldon Adelson come in and really do damage to the market? A little bit about Nevada, and I'm not going to spend too much time because we've heard earlier. It's poker only. It's a nominal fee to get a license, and in relative to what they're contemplating in California, which is $30 million to get the license, it's nominal. 6.75 for the tax. Bad actor. A bad actor clause is basically it analyzes were you in the U.S. as an operator or a supplier, and when did you leave? Did you leave before 2006 or after 2006? And the answers to those questions will determine whether you are suitable in a state, and that will vary state by state. The hosting must be done in Nevada, which is expensive. The geolocation is painful. You have to use your cell phone to authenticate, which is every time you want to go and log on, you got to make sure that your cell phone's right there. You got to put in a 4D code, and then it will continue to geolocate you, especially if you're close to the border. While 24 operators have applied, only 2 have gone live. So it's been slow. And you expected it to go slow because it's going to be poker only in a state with 3 million people. Delaware went live on the 31st of October through the lottery. The vendor was 888. And what's interesting here is for technical specification and regs, they adopted a more open policy, because if you have a hosting in Delaware and your hosting has to be in Nevada, you can never have collusion for your players. So you can never have these players reside on a common platform. So there's no what we call liquidity growth. So every state will remain its own state, which is not great for progressives. It's not great for creating community. And so that's why Delaware took the opposite approach of New Jersey and Nevada, which is put the service anywhere. They can reside in Nevada, they can reside in New Jersey. We don't care. We want to go with the ones with the biggest state, which is critical in how the US goes forward. Because if more states adopt silly regulations like Nevada, then the whole thing will just be a mess. So the lottery issued, they're the ones who are managing the whole platform, but they're not the ones going live. It's the 3 tracks that they have, the race tracks. So it's not their brand and their marketing budget, it's the race tracks, they're lottery agents. The problem there right now is that there's a 43.5% tax, state share, on slots and 34% on table games. And that is not, when you have that kind of state share coupled with 20% promotions and another 15 that's going to your provider, there's not a whole lot left to market with. So there's a bit of an issue right now because the provider doesn't want to invest as much as they would have liked had they thought that there was marketing going on, and they don't want to market if the solution's not entirely ready. So there's a bit of a standoff going on, and it's been an issue, let's just say. And now New Jersey was the most recent state to launch. They soft launched in November 21st with a hard launch November 26th. Unlike Nevada, which is kind of drip feeding when the operators go live, everyone went live at once, which made it challenging but fair. No one had an uncompetitive advantage. The tax rate is 17.5%, and why that's interesting is that the land-based casinos are charged 8.25%. So you have to be super careful about cannibalizing your business. So it's not cannibalizing if you can take your players in your land-based and say, hey, just play online. But if you're now preventing your players from coming back onto your casino, you're being charged a difference of 8.5. So you're losing 8.5% of revenue because it's going right to the government. So one thing that would have been better if they would have kept it equal, so you didn't care where those players were coming from, but now you do care. You really don't want them to be not coming to your casino facility as much. The worst part here is that the hosting has to be done not only in the state, but has to be done inside the casino itself. Now, I don't know if any of you have been to Atlantic City, or if you remember Sandy, but it was not a pretty time when all the flooding in the casino basements. So it's a bit tricky to have the hosting in a very low portion. It's not, if you were creating a hosting facility for a casino, you wouldn't be putting in a low-lying area that's prone to floods. One of the problems is that someone fed the governor a very bold statement that this was going to make $200 million in revenue, and last month in December we saw revenue of $7.5 million, and that's not even the state's share, right? So they thought the state share would be $200 million for the state, meaning it's going to be $1 billion industry this year. At $7.5 million run rate, that's not really good. Today we'll find out a little bit more. I think that it'll end up being probably about half that this year, and then it'll probably grow to about $400 million next year. But I don't know when we'll see it ever being $1 billion. So what states are next? California's been incredibly controversial. It's been mainly driven by the tribes, some of whom don't get along at all. And so there's a lot of infighting. We've finally seen some movement. We're hoping for it to be this year, later this year. And that would be great because it's a huge market. They've got more, I think they've got like 38 million people in that state, which would be great. Poker only. Another state that's coming online is Illinois. We'll hope to see that. I'm asked to be going a little faster. Iowa, Pennsylvania, Washington. I said why to Pennsylvania because they're feeling the pressure from New Jersey. And now now I wanted to go into sports betting just really quickly. So in 1992, the government created a ban on all sports betting. So basically what happened was there was 4 states that offered sports betting already. And they said, okay, for those states, you can continue doing it. And even though the sports leagues have bullied some of the, they've bullied the states to say, if you continue to do that, we're going to pull all our NBA and all of the, the hockey out of the state. So really only one state does it, which is Nevada, which has no sports teams, because there's nothing to fight with. Right now, New Jersey was allowed, they were grandfathered in 1992. They chose not to take it. They said, no, we don't want to do sports betting. So now what's happened is that New Jersey said, you know what, we kind of want to do that. And we think that the ban on sports betting is illegal. In the states, we have something called the Constitution, and then we have amendments. And this violates the 10th Amendment, which is that if it's not stated in the Constitution, it automatically becomes a state right, and therefore the government had no right to put this ban on. Sometimes these things happen in the states. You could say that the Unlawful Gambling Act violates the 10th Amendment as well. So right now, New Jersey is in the process of suing the federal government to say that is, a violation of the Constitution. This is the 3rd attempt at somebody or an entity suing the federal government. They believe that on this particular case that they are, that their defense is much more buttoned up than the 2 prior. So they think that there's going to be a good shot that this can happen. It will take a while. But what's important here, and because I'm going to run out of time, is that if I have to, if I have to question where this is going, because I don't want to run out, there are state-by-state initiatives right now. There's federal that had been gaining a lot of momentum that's now losing momentum. There's this issue of the ban, a federal ban by Sheldon Adelson, and also 16 attorney generals that joined him. And where is this going? I do think that there's a possibility that we could lead to PASPA 2, which is the sports betting situation, which says the states that did it, you can do this. And the states that haven't done this, haven't regulated, you can't do it. I mean, that is a possibility of where this can go. I hope it doesn't go that way. We'll see what happens with how successful Sheldon Adelson is, because he has a lot of money and he has a lot of political influence. So that's just sort of view of where the state of the states is. And I have a whole thing that goes into free and alternative, but you know what? You guys have heard it already. Do I have any questions? Who publishes that? So by law, by regulation, you have to go and submit your numbers every month. And they then collate them, they look at them, they audit them, and then they publish them, I guess, the second week. It's the DGE that's putting out the numbers, yeah. And it comes out at 8 o'clock this time tonight. So, no other, oh.
Hi. Do you think that the shortfall in New Jersey is going to slow down the timeline for other U.S. states? Sort of the Chris Christie overpromise thing? Like, what do you think that's going to do? Or actually, rather, how bad do you think it'll be?
So I think it's bad now, but I have a whole article that I'm writing right now about why I think it's bad, not only for the reasons that I said, which are the player funnel, but more importantly, they launched this November 28th. Like, who wants to go and market into the Christmas season when you're fighting with all the retailers? The advertising rates are extremely high. The regulations are constantly being tweaked in New Jersey, and you never know when your platform's not gonna be able to meet those tweaks, and they could rip you down. So, it's hard to market right now with such an unknown. But I think starting in January, you saw a lot more advertising that started to take place. So I think it'll get there. Rome wasn't built in a day, and I'm like shocked that everyone thinks that, 8 sites should be live, ready to go, as if, everything, like everyone looks at it like the online gaming industry in Europe, it's 10 years old. The customer service needs to get better. They need to explain to customers why the geolocation's not working, why the payments aren't working. So I think it'll get better, but on your question of will it slow down states, I think the states were taking a wait-and-see approach to New Jersey. The part that disappoints me the most is that the DGE has come out and said, we're disappointed, which then other regulators look and say, well, if they're disappointed, maybe we should slow down and see how this goes. And I do think it's going to have a negative impact. Had the DGE come out and been a little bit more positive and said, I realize it's a slow start, there are a lot of challenges there, but they kind of criticized the industry, and that wasn't helpful for not doing enough marketing. A party has blown at least 15 million in marketing in the first month and a half. It's a lot of marketing. I don't really know what they expected. So I think it'll get better. It can't get worse. It can get worse. You know what? I think New Jersey was incredibly successful because none of them violated any geolocation. So you didn't see any situation where someone in New York or Pennsylvania got on and said, look, and took a video of themselves on YouTube and said, I can break the geolocation, which I'm sure a lot of people tried to do. So, I do think it was relatively successful, and I wish the DGE would be a little more positive on it.
Melissa, we talked about more regulatory involvement on the social casino side being out there. How is that for the states? And is this a federal discussion or a state-by-state discussion?
So, and this is the big fear that I talked about last year and also in the summer. So I guess the conference organizers didn't want me to speak about that. But I feel like the regulators in the US are far behind the European regulators when it comes to this topic. And my fear is that I don't want it to be so that there's like a rubber band impact to say, and like I'm gonna bury my head in the sand. There's no problem here. But then when somebody loses their house over social casino, that they're gonna just have the opposite of impact and just over-regulate. And so that's my big fear. And I wished that there was more communication, and I'm glad that the SGA is finally working and getting their voice out there and helping educate the regulators. But there's a lot of lack of understanding on the U.S. regulators' part. And if you look at it, they can't get their head around online gambling or just starting to. And you imagine adding this whole complication of social gambling. It just, it's so far beyond.
Yeah, but for the social gaming community, regulation is not as much a hot topic. Yeah. So what do you think of going into a self-regulation route?
Well, that's what the SGA was supposed to do. It was supposed to help self-regulate, to say, well, we're going to have more transparency in the game. We're going to have more responsible wagering limits. We're going to make sure that we don't market to minors. So they're trying to go down that self-regulation route. How that's effectively being communicated to the rest of the regulators, I'm not sure. There has to be a lot more education that goes on, I think.
Seems a difficult path.
It is.
Not only to the regulators, but also even to the social gaming community, because if you've never been used to a very strict regulation and not know the downsides of it, do you really see the need? It's key.
I mean, the alternative of not regulation and what you were talking about and the minefield that you have to operate in, it's ugly. Especially in the United States. I mean, here it's great. The United States is like so much more difficult to operate in as a regulated company than in Europe. So we hope that it doesn't go down that path. Thanks. No more questions? If you do, just come and get me. And if you want a copy of those slides, just let me know.